Some cartoons don't just fade into memory, they vanish, like they were erased from history. The 1960s gave us animation that broke rules, pushed buttons, and sometimes went so far that networks quietly buried them. Ever wonder why your parents mention a cartoon you've never seen, and no reruns exist? From toy commercials disguised as shows to parodies gone wrong, these are the forgotten tunes that disappeared. And trust me, some of them vanished for reasons you won't see coming. Batfink's 1966 to 1967. On paper, Batfink was harmless. A superhero bat with metallic wings fighting crime alongside his karate-chopping sidekick. Created by Hal Seeger, the show was meant to spoof Batman while still entertaining kids. But Batfink quickly ran into trouble. The villains were loaded with uncomfortable stereotypes, like Hugo a Go-Go, a mad scientist whose exaggerated mannerisms drew from Cold War caricatures of Eastern Europeans. Worse, Karate, the sidekick, was a walking catalog of offensive Asian stereotypes. By 1967, complaints poured in from parents' groups. The character's broken English dialogue and exaggerated martial arts tropes crossed the line even by 1960s standards. NBC affiliates in major cities started refusing to air episodes, and things only spiraled when one infamous episode joked about nuclear warfare. Remember, kids at the time were doing duck and cover drills at school. Dropping gags about atomic bombs didn't land as comedy, it struck fear. Hal Seeger tried to defend the show as satire, but the damage was done. By 1968, Batfink was pulled from most major markets. Surviving episodes were locked away or destroyed, making complete runs nearly impossible to find today. What lingers are fragments on YouTube and collector reels. Ironically, Batfink's metallic wings, his signature gimmick, were recycled into later Hanna-Barbera shows. The hero himself, buried in the graveyard of forgotten animation, remembered less for his crime fighting and more as a cautionary tale in cultural missteps. The Beagles, 1966 to 1967. CBS thought they had a hit with the Beagles. Two cartoon dogs, Stringer and Tubby, fronted a rock band clearly inspired by the Beatles. The timing was perfect. The Fab Four were the hottest act in the world. But instead of just parodying the music, the Beagles also lampooned the Beatles' lifestyle. And that's where things crashed. The very first episode sent the duo into a groovy pad filled with animals acting strangely. Their half-shut eyes and expand-your-mind dialogue made the drug undertones obvious. Parents picked up on it instantly. Religious groups accused CBS of normalizing counterculture, and within weeks, boycotts rolled out across the Midwest. Then came the legal hammer. The Beatles' lawyers argued the songs copied too closely from their catalog. CBS, already under fire, pulled the plug after one season. Only 26 episodes were made, and most were destroyed in the 1970s when CBS cleaned its vaults. The few surviving reels sit in legal limbo today, making the Beagles almost impossible to track down. Ironically, the controversy only added to its myth. Fans describe it as a psychedelic parody too bold for Saturday mornings. Instead of being remembered as a clever spoof, it's now a lost footnote in cartoon history, buried by lawyers, parents, and a culture that wasn't ready for animated rock dogs. Hot Wheels, 1969 to 1971. Mattel had just launched Hot Wheels, the hottest toy cars on the market. Their big idea? Turn them into a TV show. ABC agreed, and by 1969, kids were tuning into Hot Wheels, following Jack Wheeler and his friends as they raced custom cars and solved mysteries. Every shiny vehicle on screen, you could buy it in stores the same week. It wasn't subtle, and that's what killed it. The FCC had rules banning children's shows from being disguised commercials, but Mattel insisted Hot Wheels was entertainment first, toys second. Nobody bought that excuse. Advocacy groups slammed it as manipulative marketing. And when a whistleblower revealed Mattel's internal memos describing the cartoon as a narrative vehicle for product placement, the scandal exploded. By 1971, the FCC ruled against the show, fining several ABC affiliates. Mattel was banned from producing TV content for 5 years, and Hot Wheels became a textbook case in media law. But here's the twist. The controversy made the toys even more popular. Kids wanted the cars they couldn't watch on TV. Episodes survive today only in faded VHS transfers, studied less as cartoons and more as artifacts of a marketing scheme gone wrong. Hot Wheels didn't just vanish from TV. It rewrote the rules of children's programming forever. Sinbad Jr. and His Magic Belt, 1965 to 1966. Hanna-Barbera dominated the 60s, but even they had flops. Sinbad Jr. and His Magic Belt seemed simple enough. The son of the legendary sailor gained super strength with a belt and went on adventures with his parrot, Salty. But here's where it went wrong. The creators set the show in a modern Middle East, complete with caricatured accents, camels, and made-up nations. In the 1960s, the Middle East was already a politically sensitive region, and the show's crude stereotypes hit like a hammer. Arab-American groups protested immediately, calling out the cartoon as degrading. International backlash made things worse. Several Middle Eastern countries threatened to ban all Hanna-Barbera products, including the Flintstones. Even the U.S. State Department weighed in, worried the cartoon was damaging diplomatic relations. ABC quietly pulled the plug after one season, and Hanna-Barbera tried to bury it, even denying for years that they had produced the show. Bootlegs of Sinbad Jr. float online today, often stripped from faded syndication prints. The legacy? Proof that even the most powerful animation studio of the 60s could stumble badly when they underestimated cultural sensitivity. The Funny Company, 1963 to 1965. Ken Snyder wanted to make a progressive cartoon that celebrated diversity. The Funny Company featured kids from different ethnic backgrounds solving problems together. Noble idea, right? Unfortunately, it turned into a mess of stereotypes so bad it's now a case study in failed representation. Characters included Jasper, a black boy who spoke only in rhyme and loved watermelon, Mary, an Asian girl who giggled and bowed constantly, and Pterodactyl, a prehistoric bird voiced with a Mexican caricatured accent. Each storyline reinforced cliches. Jasper danced or played sports, Mary was good at math, Terry was lazy. Snyder thought he was being inclusive, but groups like the NAACP and the Congress of Racial Equality immediately protested. The educational segments made things worse. Kids were taught absurd facts about cultures, like all Native Americans lived in teepees and all Asians ate fortune cookies. Major markets like New York and Chicago dropped the show, and by 1965, CBS canceled it outright. Snyder defended it until his death, insisting he meant well, but the Funny Company is remembered today not for breaking barriers, but for reinforcing every stereotype it set out to dismantle. Rocket Robin Hood, 1966 to 1969. Imagine the legend of Robin Hood, but set in the year 3000 with laser bows, rocket ships, and villains who wanted to steal the universe's circles. Yes, that actually happened. Rocket Robin Hood was Canada's trippy contribution to 60s television, later syndicated in the US, and it quickly became infamous for its bizarre storytelling. Produced on a shoestring budget, the animation was rough, even by the loose standards of the decade. But what really unnerved parents and educators wasn't the shaky visuals, it was the content. Episodes regularly devolved into surreal nonsense. Robin and his merry men fought a telepathic walrus, reversed the polarity of imagination, and once defeated a villain by singing the square root of purple. Confused kids quoted the show at school, alarming teachers who thought it undermined logic and critical thinking. Child psychologists began warning that Rocket Robin Hood blurred the line between fantasy and learning in damaging ways. Worse, the show's psychedelic tone echoed counterculture trends of the late 60s. Parents thought it felt more like a bad drug trip than a Saturday morning adventure. The final straw came when CBC aired an episode where Robin meets his own thoughts, portrayed as screaming pancakes. Over 400 complaints flooded in the same day, and the show was pulled. Most episodes were destroyed, but bootlegs survive in collector circles. Today, Rocket Robin Hood is remembered less as a kid's cartoon, and more as proof that sometimes imagination without limits just becomes chaos. The Adventures of Pow Wow, 1960 to 1961. If you want to see how badly the early 60s missed the mark on representation, look no further than The Adventures of Pow Wow. Produced by Screen Gems, the show followed a young Native American boy, Pow Wow, in the Old West. It was supposed to be wholesome, but nearly every element was soaked in stereotypes. Pow Wow spoke in broken English, saying things like, "Me go find buffalo now." His tribe was a mashup of cultural cliches: Plains headdresses, Pacific Northwest totem poles, teepees in regions where they didn't exist. Between the stories, educational segments dished out fake history, teaching kids that all Native Americans worshipped a single Great Spirit and had no written language. Native groups immediately called it cultural erasure. The backlash grew fast. The National Congress of American Indians labeled the show cultural genocide, disguised as children's entertainment. Veterans groups joined in, pointing out the insult of airing racist caricatures of people who had fought in World War II and Korea. Protests reached TV stations in New York and Los Angeles, leading to cancellations by 1961. Screen Gems eventually pulled the plug, not out of guilt, but to protect future projects from being tainted. Today, The Adventures of Pow Wow is studied as one of the most offensive children's shows ever aired, surviving only in scattered reels and cautionary textbooks. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, 1960 to 1962. Bob Kane, the creator of Batman, wasn't shy about cashing in on his own success. In 1960, he debuted Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, a parody of the superhero craze. On the surface, it was lighthearted. In reality, it was one of the most violent cartoons ever aimed at children. The cat and mouse duo fought crime in Empire City, but unlike Batman's clean gadgetry, Courageous Cat carried a cat gun, a firearm that could shoot smoke, ice, or explosives. Episodes depicted villains visibly injured, bones cracked, and teeth knocked out. Kids began imitating the fights, building their own toy guns. Complaints surged. But it wasn't just the violence. Courageous Cat was a disaster in tone. The hero often caused more destruction than the villains, demolishing entire buildings just to stop a purse snatcher. Critics accused the show of teaching that chaos and firepower solved everything. Parent groups organized letter-writing campaigns, and affiliates began dropping the series after only 2 years. While it briefly lived on in syndication, most episodes disappeared from circulation by the mid-60s. Today, Courageous Cat exists only as a cult curiosity, a forgotten reminder that sometimes the man behind Batman swung and missed spectacularly. Linus the Lionhearted, 1964 to 1969. Linus the Lionhearted was colorful, cheerful, and doomed from the start. Sponsored entirely by Post cereals, the show was built around mascots like Sugar Bear and lovable Truly the Mailman. At first, kids loved it, but regulators quickly realized the obvious. Linus was basically a half-hour commercial disguised as entertainment. Every storyline pushed cereal branding. Characters hawked products directly to the camera, and episodes introduced new mascot gimmicks in sync with grocery store rollouts. By 1969, the FCC cracked down on program-length commercials, and Linus became the poster child for abuse of advertising in children's TV. The fallout was huge. Not only was Linus canceled, but the FCC passed stricter rules, forcing networks to separate commercials from content. Post serials retreated from TV sponsorships, and most of the episodes were shelved. Sugar Bear survived in ads for decades, but the rest of Linus's cast disappeared with the show. Clips resurface occasionally online, but full episodes are locked away. For kids who grew up with Linus, the memory lingers. For everyone else, it's just another example of corporate overreach, turning cartoons into commercials, and losing everything in the process. King Leonardo and His Short Subjects, 1960 to 1963. Before Underdog soared into fame, Total Television tried its hand at another cartoon, King Leonardo and His Short Subjects. Narrated with a wink and a nudge, it followed King Leonardo the Lion and his bumbling sidekick, Odie Coloni. Despite a prime Saturday morning slot on NBC, it never stuck. The series mixed satire and slapstick, but was overshadowed by stronger hits from Hanna-Barbera. Worse, syndication killed it. Networks preferred underdog reruns, leaving King Leonardo to fade into obscurity. By the late 60s, the episodes were rarely seen. The characters briefly resurfaced in serial ads and tie-ins, but without reruns, they slipped from public memory. Today, only fragments circulate among collectors. It's a rare case of a cartoon not being banned or controversial. It just quietly lost the fight for attention. King Leonardo became a ghost of television's first cartoon boom, remembered only by die-hard animation buffs. The Mighty Hercules, 1963 to 1966. If you were a kid in the early 60s, you might remember a muscle-bound hero flying across your TV screen with a magic ring that gave him strength. That was the Mighty Hercules, produced by Adventure Cartoon Productions. On paper, it had everything: mythology, action, even a pet centaur named Newton who tagged along. But the execution? Cheap, repetitive, and ultimately forgettable. The animation was painfully limited, characters barely moved, and entire episodes recycled backgrounds. The music was oddly catchy, with Hercules bursting into song mid-battle, but critics mocked it as campy rather than heroic. What really doomed the show, though, was syndication fatigue. By the mid-60s, stations were flooded with higher-quality imports and Hanna-Barbera hits. Hercules, with its bargain bin production, looked embarrassingly outdated in comparison. Worse, the mythology purists hated it. Ancient Greek legend was reduced to clunky dialogue and magic trinkets. Hercules didn't wrestle with philosophy, he punched monsters, while Newton repeated everything twice in an irritating falsetto. Parents complained the show wasn't educational, and teachers called it misleading. By 1966, most stations had quietly dropped it. Today, the Mighty Hercules lives on in fragments on YouTube and the Internet Archive, usually mocked more than celebrated. It didn't vanish because it was offensive. It vanished because it was so bland and cheaply made that no one bothered to preserve it. A strong man brought low by weak storytelling. Space Angel, 1962 to 1964. Picture this: sleek space adventure, rocket ships, and interstellar espionage. Sounds cool, right? Now, imagine the characters' mouths replaced with real human lips, pasted onto static faces. That was Space Angel, one of the strangest cartoons of the early 60s. Created by Cambria Productions, it used Synchrovox technology, the same unnerving trick used in Clutch Cargo, where live-action mouths were superimposed onto drawn characters. Kids either thought it looked eerie or downright terrifying. The stories followed Scott McCloud, the Space Angel, defending Earth against alien threats, but the gimmick overshadowed everything. Instead of watching thrilling space battles, kids stared at unsettling lip movements floating on otherwise frozen faces. By 1964, ratings collapsed. Parents thought the visuals were creepy, and critics slammed the show as lazy animation. The space craze of the decade was booming with more polished offerings like The Jetsons, leaving Space Angel to feel like a budget knockoff. Even worse, the limited syndication meant many markets only saw a handful of episodes before they disappeared entirely. Collectors have salvaged pieces, and the series occasionally resurfaces in discussions about so bad it's fascinating animation. But Space Angel never found an afterlife. It vanished because its own gimmick made it unwatchable. Proof that sometimes innovation is just a bad idea dressed in space clothes. Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales, 1963 to 1966. You'd think a cartoon starring Don Adams, the voice who later gave us Inspector Gadget, would be a guaranteed hit. Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales followed a penguin and his walrus buddy, Chumley, as they tried harebrained schemes to escape the zoo. Each misadventure ended with them learning practical lessons from their friend, Mr. Whoopi. Sounds charming, right? Here's the catch. Tennessee Tuxedo was supposed to be educational. Episodes often paused the comedy to explain real-world concepts, from how elevators work to why traffic lights are timed. Kids didn't tune in for lectures, they tuned in for laughs. Viewers quickly grew bored, and stations found the edutainment approach killed rerun value. Even worse, the show's pacing was slow. weighed down by awkward teaching segments. While Scooby-Doo and Flintstones thrived on fast gags, Tennessee felt like school disguised as TV. By the mid-60s, rerun syndication fizzled, and total television shifted its focus to Underdog, leaving Tennessee forgotten. Clips survive online, and nostalgia keeps him alive for a small cult fan base. But Tennessee Tuxedo's legacy is bittersweet. It tried to teach, but kids just wanted the penguin antics. When cartoons double as homework, they don't last long. The new Casper cartoon show, 1963 to 1964. Casper the Friendly Ghost was a star in the 1940s and 50s. So, when ABC revived him in 1963 with the new Casper cartoon show, expectations were high. The series paired new Casper adventures with recycled theatrical shorts from Paramount. But the revival flopped hard. The problem was timing. By the 1960s, Casper's gentle, sentimental stories felt hopelessly old-fashioned. Audiences were gravitating toward zanier, sharper humor from Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers. Watching Casper mope about being lonely while trying to make friends seemed dull compared to Scooby-Doo chasing monsters. The limited animation didn't help. The new segments were cheap, with stiff character designs that looked primitive even for their era. Ratings sagged after one season, and ABC quietly retired the show. Unlike other franchises, Casper didn't bounce back until the late 90s, leaving this 1963 series to rot in syndication purgatory. Today, most episodes sit in archives, occasionally resurfacing in compilation DVDs, but the full run is rarely aired or discussed. The new Casper cartoon show didn't vanish because of controversy. It disappeared because it was a ghost of its former self, caught in the wrong decade. Cool McCool, 1966 to 1969. By the late 60s, spy mania was everywhere. James Bond was a box office king, Get Smart was a TV hit, and Batman's campy success had opened the door for parodies. Enter Cool McCool, created by Bob Kane, the same man who birthed Batman. Unfortunately, lightning didn't strike twice. Cool McCool was supposed to be a groovy, bumbling secret agent. He had the gadgets, the trench coat, and a theme song kids still hum if they remember it. But the show's humor fell flat. Unlike Get Smart, which balanced wit with charm, McCool's gags were repetitive, leaning on slapstick without payoff. The villains, cartoonish figures like Hurricane Harry and Jack in the Box, were colorful but forgettable. Worse, the animation was lazy, and McCool himself came across more annoying than endearing. Kids tuned out quickly, and stations began dropping the series. By 1969, it was gone. What makes it lost is that Cool McCool never found rerun life. While Batman was syndicated endlessly, McCool's episodes languished in archives. Collectors have dug up a few reels, but the majority remain obscure. Today, Cool McCool is remembered less as a spy spoof and more as Bob Kane's forgotten misfire, proof that not every pop culture trend deserves a cartoon. So, there you have it. 15 cartoons from the 60s that didn't just fade, they practically vanished. Some were too controversial, some too commercial, and others just too weird or boring to survive. Which of these lost tunes do you think deserved another shot? And which ones should stay buried? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more forgotten TV deep dives, and remember, sometimes the shows we can't find tell us the most about the era that made them.